Let me tell you something that most people will never understand. Right now, right this second, while you're listening to my voice, there are systems running. Invisible systems. Systems that move your money from one bank to another. Systems that keep the lights on in hospitals. Systems that make sure when you tap your phone to pay for your morning coffee it actually works. You don't think about them. Nobody does. And that's the point. Because when infrastructure truly works, it becomes invisible. It disappears into the background of everyday life like gravity. Like oxygen, you don't sit around thanking the atmosphere for existing. You just breathe. But take it away. Take it away for even 5 minutes and suddenly everyone becomes very, very aware of what they lost. My name is Dave. And for 11 years, I was the man who kept everything invisible. I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of genius. I'm not. I don't have a PhD. I didn't graduate top of my class from NIT. I didn't build an app in my dorm room that sold for 8 figures. What I did was show up. Every single day. For 11 years. I showed up to a windowless room in the basement of a building that most employees didn't even know existed. And I did the kind of work that is almost impossible to explain to someone who doesn't live in this world. So let me try. Imagine a city. A real city. Millions of people. Cars on the roads. Electricity in the walls. Water flowing through pipes underground. Traffic lights changing at precisely the right intervals, so that everything moves and nothing collides. Now imagine that one single person, is responsible for all of it. The roads, the pipes, the electrical grid, the traffic signals, the locks on every door, the alarm system on every building, the walls between every neighborhood so that a problem on 5th Street doesn't cascade into a catastrophe on 9th Avenue. That's what a network engineer does, except the city isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of data, packets, protocols, ones and zeros moving at the speed of light through fiber optic cables thinner than a human hair. And if you do it right, if you do it really, really right, nobody ever knows you exist. That was my life. And honestly, I loved it. I started at Meridian Integrated Solutions, we'll call them that, in 2012. Back then, they were a mid-sized company, about 300 employees. They handled payment processing for regional businesses, restaurants, retail chains, medical offices, small enough that everyone still knew each other's names, big enough that the infrastructure actually mattered. When I walked in for my interview, the network was a mess. And I mean that in the most technical, non-dramatic way possible. It was a mess. They had one flat network. Everything, and I mean everything, lived on the same segment. The CEO's laptop, the intern's phone, the payment processing servers, the guest Wi-Fi in the lobby. All of it. One giant broadcast domain, like a house with no walls, no doors, no rooms. Just one massive open floor where everyone could see everything, touch everything, and break everything. Their firewall was a consumer-grade router from Best Buy. I'm not exaggerating. It was a Netgear Nighthawk. The kind of thing you buy to stream Netflix in your apartment. And it was sitting in an unlocked closet, next to a mop bucket, protecting, and I use that word very loosely, a network that processed 400,000 credit card transactions a month. There was no redundancy, no failover, no segmentation, no intrusion detections logging, no documented topology, no disaster recovery plan. Their backups were stored on an external hard drive that sat on top of the server it was backing up. Like putting your spare house key inside the house. I looked at all of this during my interview and I almost walked out. Almost. But then they told me something that changed my mind. They said, "We know we need help. We know we're behind. And whoever we hire, we're going to get out of their way and let them build this the right way." And to their credit, for a long time, that's exactly what they did. I spent the first 18 months rebuilding everything, from scratch. I segmented the network into VLANs. For those of you who don't know, a VLAN, a virtual local area network, is essentially a wall. A digital wall. It separates different parts of the network so they can't see each other, can't talk to each other, can't interfere with each other. So I built walls. The payment processing systems got their own VLAN. Completely isolated. You could not reach those servers from any other part of the network without going through a firewall rule that I personally wrote, tested, documented, and monitored. Every rule had a PERG entry. Every rule had my name on it. The corporate workstations got their own VLAN. Email, file shares, internal tools, separated from everything else. The guest Wi-Fi, the network that visitors, clients, and the occasional delivery driver connected to, got its own VLAN with no route, zero route, to anything internal. You could sit in that lobby for 100 years and you would never see a single internal system. I made sure of that. VoIP phones. Separate VLAN. Management interfaces for switches and routers. Separate VLAN. Security cameras. Separate VLAN. Printers, and yes, printers are a security risk. People never think about that. Separate VLAN. I built the network the way you build a submarine. Compartments. Bulkheads. So that if one section floods, the rest of the vessel survives. Then I replaced that Netgear Nighthawk, God rest its soul, with enterprise-grade Palo Alto firewalls. Two of them, primary and failover. If the first one died, the second one took over in under 3 seconds. Seamless. Invisible. The kind of transition that users never notice because they're not supposed to notice. I configured intrusion detection and prevention systems. IDS and IPS. Think of them as motion sensors and tripwires. If something moved through that network that wasn't supposed to be there, a port scan, a malformed packet, a known attack signature, the system would flag it, log it, and in some cases, kill the connection automatically before it ever reached its target. I set up centralized logging. Every event, every connection, every failed login, every firewall hit. All of it flowing into a CM, a security information and event management system, where I could see the entire network's heartbeat in real time. Like a doctor watching an EG, I could see the rhythm. And more importantly, I could see when the rhythm changed. I implemented proper backups. 3, 2, 1 rule. 3 copies of every critical dataset. 2 different storage media. 1 offsite. The on-site backups lived on a dedicated storage server on its own VLAN, completely isolated from production. The off-site backups were encrypted and shipped to a secure facility 40 miles away. If the building burned to the ground, I could rebuild the entire digital infrastructure from a clean room anywhere in the country. I wrote the disaster recovery plan, 93 pages. Every scenario. Power failure, hardware failure, insider threat, natural disaster. Every scenario had a procedure. Every procedure had a checklist. Every checklist had been tested. And the uptime, 99.999%. That's 5 nines. In our industry, 5 nines is the gold standard. It means that over the course of an entire year, total unplanned downtime is less than 5 minutes and 15 seconds. 5 minutes. Out of 520, 5,600 minutes in a year. I gave them that, year after year after year. And here's the thing about 5 nines uptime. Here's the cruel, bitter irony of being excellent at a job like mine. When everything works, people forget you exist. Let me tell you about Brad. Brad. I need you to picture this man because you already know him. You've worked with him. You've sat across from him in a meeting. You've watched him get promoted while better people got passed over. Listened to him talk for 45 minutes without saying a single thing of substance. Brad was a finance guy. Mid-40s. Came from a mid-tier MBA program that he mentioned constantly. The kind of man who describes himself as people person on LinkedIn and has never once been described that way by an actual person. He wore a Patagonia vest every day, over a checkered button, down with the sleeves rolled up exactly twice, like he'd measured it. He carried a Yeti tumbler, full of cold brew, that he sipped during meetings with the cadence of a man who wanted you to know he was drinking cold brew. Vocabulary was a graveyard of corporate cliches. Let's circle back. Let's take this offline. What's the ROI on that? Can we right-size this? I want to be solution-oriented here. He once used the phrase, synergistic value alignment, in a sentence and no one in the room corrected him. Have you already stopped listening? Brad had been in finance for 6 years. He was fine at it. Not exceptional. Not terrible. He processed spreadsheets. He reviewed budgets, flagged expenses that seemed too high and forwarded them to someone more senior with a little note that said, FY, worth a look. That was his skill. Finding numbers that looked big and pointing at them. He never built anything. He never maintained anything. Never woke up at 2 in the morning because a system went down and $300,000 in transactions were sitting in a queue waiting for someone, waiting for him, to bring it all back online. He didn't know what any of that felt like, but he had opinions about it. In January of 2023, Meridian's VP of Operations, A woman named Sandra, who actually understood what the technical staff did and why they mattered, left the company. She'd been there for 9 years. She was the one who hired me. She was the one who told me to build it right. She was the one who, every year during budget season, went to bat for my department and said, "You do not cut this. You do not touch this. This is the backbone." Sandra left for a better offer. I don't blame her. She deserved it. And into the vacuum she left behind stepped Brad. I don't know exactly how it happened. I heard things. Office talk. Fragments. Apparently Brad had been lobbying for a leadership role for over a year, been having lunches with the CEO, playing golf with 2 of the board members. He'd put together a presentation, a beautiful presentation, I'm told, lots of colors, lots of graphs about operational efficiency, and cost optimization, and lean infrastructure philosophy. I never saw the presentation, but I heard it had excellent pie charts. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Company-wide email. We're excited to announce that Brad Whitfield has been promoted to Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. I read that email standing in my server room, surrounded by 14 racks of meticulously organized, perfectly functioning equipment that I had built with my own hands over the better part of a decade. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt afraid, not because I didn't trust myself. I trusted myself completely. I trusted the network I'd built. I trusted every cable, every configuration, every rule, every failover protocol. What I didn't trust was the look in Brad's eyes the first time he walked into my department, pointed at a rack of Palo Alto firewalls, and said, "So what do these actually do?" That was week 1. Week 2, Brad scheduled what he called a departmental efficiency review. I received a calendar invite with no agenda, no context, and no indication of what he actually wanted to discuss. Just a 1-hour block on a Wednesday afternoon with the subject line, IT Infrastructure Deep Dive. I remember staring at that calendar invite for a long time. Deep dive. That phrase coming from a man who had asked me what a firewall does. It was like a toddler announcing they were going to perform open heart surgery. But I showed up. Of course I showed up. I've always believed that you give people a chance. You explain things. You educate. You assume good faith until good faith is no longer a reasonable assumption. So I walked into that conference room with a folder containing network diagrams, uptime reports, security audit results, budget breakdowns, and a 5-year infrastructure roadmap that I had been developing in my own time. I was ready to explain everything. I was ready to show him why every dollar spent on my department was a dollar that protected millions of dollars in revenue. Brad was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at the head of the table, which I thought was interesting because it wasn't his conference room, and there was no established head of the table, but he had chosen to sit in the power position anyway. His Yeti tumbler was in front of him. His laptop was open. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Dave," he said, still looking at his screen. "Thanks for making time." Making time, as if this meeting was a favor I was doing for him rather than a mandatory review he had scheduled during my working hours. I sat down across from him and waited. He typed for another 30 seconds, then closed his laptop with a deliberate slowness that I think was meant to convey importance. He folded his hands on the table and looked at me with what I can only describe as practiced sincerity. "So," he said, "I've been going through the numbers." "The numbers?" I waited. "And I have to be honest with you, Dave. I'm seeing some things that concern me." I asked him what things. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for someone to ask him exactly that question. He opened his laptop again and turned it toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet, my departmental budget for the past fiscal year. He had highlighted several line items in yellow. Hardware refresh cycle. He read aloud. Nendi, $4,000. Software licensing, $112,000. Managed security services, $68,000. Offsite backup facility, $36,000 annually. He looked at me over the top of the screen. "That's over $300,000 a year, Dave. Just for your department, for one person and a bunch of machines in a basement." I started to explain. I told him that the hardware refresh cycle was essential, because enterprise networking equipment has a finite lifespan, and running critical infrastructure on aging hardware is like driving a car with 200,000 miles on it across the country and hoping the engine doesn't fail in the middle of the desert. I told him that the software licensing covered our firewall subscriptions, our SIEM platform, our endpoint protection, our vulnerability scanning tools, and that these weren't optional nice to haves but fundamental security requirements for a company that processes payment card data. I told him that the managed security services gave us 24/7 monitoring from a security operations center staffed by analysts who watched our network while I slept, because threats don't operate on a 9 to 5 schedule and I am a human being who occasionally needs to close his eyes. I told him that the off-site backup facility was the reason that if a tornado hit our building tomorrow, we could be back online within 72 hours instead of going out of business entirely. He listened to all of this. Or at least he appeared to listen, nodded at the right moments, a few times. And when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I hear you. I do. But here's my concern. We're spending all this money, and what do we have to show for it? Nothing ever goes wrong. The network just works. So how do I know we actually need all this stuff? How do I know we're not just engineering a problem that doesn't exist?" I want you to understand what he just said. I want you to really understand it. He looked at a network with 99.999% uptime, a network that had never been breached, never been down for more than 5 minutes in 11 years, a network that had protected millions of credit card numbers and processed billions of dollars in transactions without a single compliance failure, and his conclusion was that we were over-engineering. The network worked. Therefore, the network didn't need to exist. It was like looking at a hospital with 0 patient deaths and concluding that doctors were unnecessary. Like looking at a bridge that had never collapsed and deciding that structural engineers were a waste of money. Like looking at a house that had never burned down and canceling the fire insurance. I tried to explain this. I used those exact analogies. I said, "Brad, the absence of disaster is not evidence that disaster is impossible. It's evidence that the prevention systems are working. You don't see the attacks we stop because we stop them. You don't see the failures we prevent because we prevent them. That's what good infrastructure does. Makes the threats invisible by neutralizing them before they become visible." He nodded again. That same practiced nod. And then he said something that I will never forget. He said, "Dave, I appreciate your perspective. I really do. But at the end of the day I need to justify these costs to the board, and I can't walk into a board meeting and say we're spending $300,000 a year on preventing hypothetical problems. I need to show ROI. I need to show measurable impact, and right now, all I see is a cost center. A cost center. 11 years of work, 11 years of keeping the lights on, 11 years of being the reason that 400 employees could come to work every day and do their jobs without thinking for 1 second about the invisible infrastructure that made it all possible. Cost center. I left that meeting knowing exactly what was coming. I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know the timeline. But I knew. You spend enough time in this industry, and you develop a sense for it. You can feel when the ground is shifting beneath your feet. You can hear the distant rumble of the avalanche before the first rock falls. Brad was going to cut my department. He was going to cut it because he didn't understand it, and he didn't understand it because he had never bothered to learn. And he would never bother to learn because in his mind, understanding was not his job. His job was finding numbers that looked big and pointing at them. And I was the biggest number he had found so far. 3 weeks later, I received another calendar invite. This time the subject line was personnel discussion. I knew what that meant. Everyone knows what that means. The meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the morning. Before most employees arrived, Brad was there again. This time he wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was a woman from Human Resources named Patricia. I had spoken to Patricia maybe twice in 11 years. She handled benefits and onboarding. She was not someone you saw unless something was beginning or something was ending. Brad had a folder in front of him. A physical folder. Manila. Old school. He opened it and slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. I looked down at it. Was a printout of my salary. $142,000 annually. That was my compensation for 11 years of experience, multiple industry certifications, and the kind of specialized knowledge that maybe 200 people in the entire country possessed at my level. In the context of what I did and what I protected, it was an absurdly reasonable salary. I could have made more in the private sector. I could have made more as a consultant. I stayed because I believed in what I was building and because, until Sandra left, I felt valued. Brad looked at me and said, "Dave, I'm going to be direct with you. This number concerns me." I asked him why. He said, "We've been doing some benchmarking, looking at comparable positions in the market, and what we're finding is that we can bring in someone with similar qualifications at a significantly lower cost." Similar qualifications. I asked him what qualifications he was referring to. He glanced at his folder and said, "IT support, network administration, general technical services." I almost laughed. I should have laughed. Instead, I said, "Brad, I'm not IT support. I don't reset passwords. I don't fix printers. I'm a network security engineer. I design, implement, and maintain enterprise infrastructure for a PCI DSS compliant payment processing environment." Those are not comparable skill sets. That's like saying a brain surgeon and a general practitioner have similar qualifications because they both went to medical school. He did that thing again. That nod. That empty, performative nod that meant he had heard the words I said without processing any of them. "I understand you feel that way," he said. "And I respect your expertise. But at the end of the day, I have to make decisions that are in the best interest of the company. And right now, the best interest of the company is reducing overhead in areas where we're overspending." Overspending. I asked him what he was proposing. He said, "We'd like to offer you a transition package. 3 months of severance, continuation of benefits through the end of the calendar year, and a positive reference for future employment." I stared at him. I stared at him for a long time, and then I asked the only question that mattered. "Who's replacing me?" He smiled, that same smile from the efficiency review, the smile of a man who thought he was about to deliver very clever news. "We've already identified a candidate," he said. "Tyler Brennan, comes highly recommended. Very sharp, very motivated, and his salary expectations are about half of what we're currently paying you." Half. I asked what Tyler's qualifications were. Brad flipped to another page in his folder. "He has a bachelor's degree in computer science from a state university, 3 years of experience in IT helpdesk roles, and he's completed several online certifications in networking fundamentals." Networking fundamentals. I want you to understand what that means. Networking fundamentals is a beginner-level certification. It teaches you what an IP address is. It teaches you the difference between a router and a switch. It teaches you how to run a ping command. It is the equivalent of a learner's permit in the world of infrastructure. And they were handing this person the keys to a system that processed 400,000 credit card transactions a month. I tried one more time. I sat forward in my chair and I said, "Brad, I need you to understand something. What we have here is not a simple network. It's not something you can hand out to someone with fundamentals training. We are a payment processor. We are subject to PCI DSS compliance requirements. If we fail an audit, if we suffer a breach, if cardholder data is exposed, we're not talking about a bad quarter. We're talking about fines that start at 6 figures and go up from there. We're talking about lawsuits. We're talking about the card brands potentially revoking our ability to process payments entirely. I have spent 11 years making sure none of that happens. Replacing me with someone who doesn't understand this environment is not cost reduction. It's risk multiplication." Brad listened. Patricia listened. They both nodded. And then Brad said, "I appreciate your concerns. I really do. But Tyler will have access to all of your documentation. We're confident he can get up to speed quickly. And of course, we'd like you to spend your remaining 2 weeks doing a thorough knowledge transfer." A thorough knowledge transfer. 2 weeks to transfer 11 years of institutional knowledge. 2 weeks to explain a network that I had been building, tuning, and protecting for more than a decade. It was impossible. And Brad knew it was impossible. He just didn't care, because in his mind, the documentation was the knowledge. The procedures were the expertise. He had never understood that the real knowledge, the important knowledge, was in my head. It was in the instincts I had developed. The patterns I could recognize. the sounds the servers made when something was wrong, the slight variations in log patterns that told me an attack was coming before it arrived. You can't document that. You can't transfer that. You can only build it, over years, through experience. And they were about to throw all of it away to save $70,000 a year. I looked at Brad. I looked at Patricia. And I made a decision. I said. Brad blinked. He had clearly expected more resistance. Okay, he repeated. Okay, I said. I'll do the knowledge transfer. I'll document everything. I'll hand off every system to Tyler. And then I'll leave. Brad smiled. Patricia made a note on her pad. They both thanked me for my professionalism, and I walked out of that room knowing exactly what I was going to do. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. Not what they needed. What they asked for. Malicious compliance is a beautiful thing. I'm going to explain what I did over the next 2 weeks, and I want you to understand that I did nothing wrong. I did nothing illegal. I did nothing unethical. I did precisely, exactly, and comprehensively what I was asked to do. No more, no less. They asked me to document everything, so I documented everything. I created a 162-page document that covered every aspect of the network infrastructure, every VLAN, every firewall rule, every routing protocol, every backup procedure, every backup per system, every password policy, every compliance requirement. It was thorough, it was detailed, it was accurate, and it was written at a level that assumed the reader already possessed expert-level knowledge of enterprise networking, security architecture, and payment card industry compliance standards. I did not dumb it down. They didn't ask me to dumb it down. They asked me to document everything. I documented everything. I also trained Tyler. They gave me 2 weeks with him, so I used those 2 weeks. I showed him the server room. I showed him the rack layouts. I showed him the cable management. I showed him the monitoring dashboards. I showed him how to check the system health. I showed him how to read the logs. I showed him everything he needed to see. What I did not do, because they did not ask me to do, was teach him how to think. I did not teach him what to do when the monitoring system showed a pattern he didn't recognize. I did not teach him how to investigate a potential intrusion. I did not teach him how to respond to a ransomware attack. I did not teach him what to do when the backup restore fails. I did not teach him how to rebuild a domain controller from scratch. I did not teach him how to negotiate with a threat actor, or how to coordinate with law enforcement, or how to conduct a forensic investigation while keeping the business running. Those skills take years to develop. They cannot be transferred in 2 weeks. And more importantly, they were not asked for. Brad asked for a knowledge transfer. He asked for documents for a handoff. He got exactly that, nothing more. On my last day, I shook Tyler's hand. He was a nice kid, early 20s, eager, nervous, completely unaware of what he had walked into. I felt bad for him, genuinely. He was a pawn in this. He didn't know that Brad had set him up to fail. He didn't know that he was standing in the middle of a minefield with a treasure map that only showed the safe paths, if you already knew how to read it. I told him, call me if you need anything. I meant it. I didn't leave my personal number because I knew Brad would consider that unprofessional, but Tyler had my LinkedIn. He could reach me if he had to. Then I walked out of the building, got in my car, and drove home. It was over. 11 years. Done. Just like that. I spent the next few weeks decompressing, updating my resume, reaching out to contacts in the industry. I had offers within days. My reputation was solid. People knew what I could do. I didn't take the first offer that came along. I was selective. I had savings. I could afford to wait for the right opportunity. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the news. Not obsessively. Just occasionally. I set up a Google alert for Meridian's name. I followed a few industry news sites. I wanted to know when it happened. Not if. When. It took 47 days from my last day to the day I got the phone call. I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick it up. Dave. The voice was tight, stressed, barely controlled. It was Brad. Dave, we have a situation. I need you to come in, right now, please. I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, Brad, I don't work there anymore. You fired me. I know, but we need help. We need your help. Something happened and Tyler can't. He stopped. I heard voices in the background. Someone was shouting. Someone else was crying. Actually crying. I asked him what happened. He said, ransomware. One word. That's all he had to say. Ransomware. I knew exactly what that meant. I knew what their network would look like right now. I knew what their servers would look like. I knew what their screens would show. A lock icon. A countdown timer. A message in broken English demanding payment in Bitcoin. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that everything I had warned them about was now happening. I asked him to describe the situation. He started talking. Fast. Panicked, tripping over his own words. We came in this morning and nothing worked. The computers, the servers, everything. There's this message on all the screens saying our files are encrypted, and we have to pay to get them back. Tyler tried to restore from backup, but the backup server is encrypted too, the offsite backups. He stopped. What about the offsite backups? I asked. Tyler says he can't access them. Something about credentials. The credentials aren't working, and the backup company says they haven't received a successful backup in 3 weeks because someone changed the configuration and... He stopped again. I waited. Dave, we're dead in the water. We can't process payments. We can't access customer data. We can't do anything. The clients are calling. The card brands are calling. Legal is calling. Everyone is calling. And no one here knows what to do. I sipped my coffee. I let another silence stretch. Then I said, Brad, this sounds like a very serious situation. I'm sure Tyler can handle it. He has the documentation. The line went quiet. When Brad spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. Dave, please. I'm asking you. I'm begging you. We need you. Name your price, whatever you want, whatever it takes. Just please come in and fix this. There it was. Whatever you want. Whatever it takes. The same man who had looked at $300,000 a year in infrastructure costs and called it overspending was now offering me a blank check to fix the disaster he had created. The cruel irony was not lost on me. I told him I would call him back in 1 hour. Then I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about 11 years of work. I thought about the network I had built with my own hands. I thought about Tyler, that poor kid, probably standing in a server room, right now watching everything burn. I thought about the 400 employees, who were about to find out what it feels like when the invisible infrastructure becomes very, very visible. And I thought about what I wanted to do next. An hour later, I called Brad back. I told him my terms. First, my consulting rate would be $750 per hour, not a day rate, an hourly rate, billed in 15-minute increments, starting from the moment I walked through the door. Second, I required a minimum commitment of 160 hours payable in advance. That was $120,000 before I touched a single keyboard. Third, all decisions regarding the technical response would be mine and mine alone. No committee. No approvals. No Brad looking over my shoulder asking why something was taking so long. I would have complete authority over the recovery process, and anyone who interfered would be asked to leave. Fourth, once the immediate crisis was resolved, I would conduct a full security audit and infrastructure rebuild. The cost of that rebuild would be determined based on scope, but I estimated it would be in the range of $400,000 to $600,000 in hardware, software, and services. They would approve that budget before I began the recovery, because I was not going to stabilize a sinking ship, just to watch them drill new holes in it. Fifth, and this was non-negotiable, Brad would not speak to me directly for the duration of the engagement. Any questions he had would be routed through a technical liaison. I did not care who the liaison was. I simply was not going to waste billable hours explaining basic concepts to a man who still did not understand what a firewall does. Brad agreed to everything, every single term. He didn't even try to negotiate. That's how I knew how bad it was. I drove to the office. When I arrived, the parking lot was chaos. People standing outside in small groups, confused and scared. The executive team's cars were all there. The police were there. There was a news van setting up across the street. I walked through the front door and the receptionist looked at me like I was a ghost. Dave, she said. Oh my God. Dave. I didn't stop to talk. I went straight to the server room. Tyler was there. He was sitting on the floor with his back against a rack, his head in his hands. He looked up when I walked in. His eyes were red. He had been crying. I don't know what happened, he said. I followed all the procedures. I did everything the documentation said. But the backups won't work and I can't get into the... I held up my hand. I didn't need the explanation. I didn't need the excuses. I needed him out of my way. I told him to go home. I told him it wasn't his fault. I told him Brad had set him up to fail, and there was nothing he could have done differently. I'm not sure if that was entirely true, but it was true enough. Tyler was a symptom, not a cause. The cause was standing somewhere upstairs, probably in a conference room, explaining to a lawyer why he had fired the only person who understood how to prevent this exact scenario. Tyler left. I was alone in the server room. I cracked my knuckles. And then I went to work. The first thing I did was assess the damage. It was bad. Worse than I expected. The ransomware variant was a relatively new strain called Blacklock. I recognized it from industry bulletins I'd been reading during my unemployment. It was nasty. Well designed. It didn't just encrypt files. It specifically targeted backup systems, domain controllers, and network infrastructure before detonating the main payload. The attackers knew what they were doing. They had been inside the network for at least 2 weeks before triggering the encryption. That meant they had time to map the environment, identify critical systems, and systematically destroy every recovery option before anyone noticed they were there. I checked the offsite backups. Tyler was right. The credentials had been changed, but here's the thing. The backup provider had a secondary authentication mechanism that required a physical security token. I had implemented that mechanism 3 years ago specifically for this scenario. And I still had my token. Was sitting in a drawer in my home office, because no one had ever asked me to return it. Because no one at Meridian even remembered it existed. I drove home, got the token, drove back, authenticated to the backup system, and discovered that the last clean backup was from 23 days ago. 23 days of data was gone. Transactions, customer records, internal communications, financial reports. All of it, gone. But 23 days was better than everything. 23 days was survivable. I began the restoration process. It took 14 hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I consumed 6 cups of coffee and a vending machine sandwich that I'm pretty sure had been there since my last day at the company. I rebuilt the domain controllers first, then the authentication systems, then the core network infrastructure, then the application servers, then the databases. Layer by layer, system by system, like a surgeon reassembling a patient's organs after a catastrophic accident. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the network was operational. Not perfect. Not complete. But operational. Employees could log in, critical systems were running, payment processing was back online. I had saved the company. Again, but this time there was no invisibility. This time, everyone saw exactly what had happened. Everyone saw the screens go dark. Everyone saw the ransom message. Everyone saw the chaos. And everyone saw me walk back through those doors and put it all back together with my bare hands. Over the next 3 weeks, I conducted the full security audit I had demanded. The findings were extensive. In the 47 days since my departure, Tyler had made several configuration changes that he didn't fully understand. He had disabled some of the intrusion detection rules, because they were generating too many alerts, and he didn't know how to tune them. He had opened firewall ports to allow a third-party vendor remote access without implementing proper access controls. He had let the security monitoring contract lapse, because Brad told him it was too expensive, and they could handle it internally. And he had changed the off-site backup credentials to something simpler, because he kept forgetting the complex password I had originally set. Any one of those mistakes would have been survivable in isolation. Together, they created the perfect storm. The attackers had gotten in through the open firewall port. They had moved laterally without detection, because the intrusion prevention system was disabled. They had compromised the backup credentials because they were too simple. And they had operated for weeks without anyone noticing because the security monitoring contract had been cancelled. Every cost that Brad had cut, every optimization he had implemented, every decision he had made to prove that I was overspending, all of it had contributed directly to the breach. The total cost of the incident, when all was calculated, exceeded $2.3 million. That included my consulting fees, the infrastructure rebuild, the forensic investigation, the legal fees, the regulatory fines, the customer notification costs, the credit monitoring services they were now obligated to provide to every affected cardholder, the emergency PR firm they hired to manage the media fallout, the revenue lost during the 3 days of downtime, and the long-term reputational damage that would take years to fully quantify. $2.3 million. Brad had fired me to save $70,000 a year. He had cut $300,000 in security spending because he couldn't justify it to the board. And in return, he had cost the company nearly 8 times that amount in a single incident. Plus, of course, his own job. Brad was terminated 4 days after the breach became public. I heard about it from one of the executives who had been in the meeting where the board demanded his resignation. Apparently, he tried to blame Tyler. He tried to blame the attackers. He tried to blame the economy. He tried to blame everyone except himself. The board wasn't having it. They had seen my post-incident report. They had seen the timeline. They had seen the direct causal relationship between Brad's decisions and the breach. They had seen the emails where he overruled security recommendations. They had seen the budget cuts he had approved. There was no one else to blame. He was gone by the end of the week. I don't know what happened to him after that. I don't particularly care. Some people learn from their mistakes. Some people don't. Brad struck me as the latter. He'll probably land somewhere else. He'll probably make the same mistakes again. People like Brad always do. Tyler stayed. I recommended that they keep him. It wasn't his fault. He was given an impossible task with no support and no training. With proper mentorship and time, he could grow into a competent engineer. The company agreed. They enrolled him in a training program and assigned him a senior mentor from an outside consulting firm. Last I heard, he was doing well. He sent me a LinkedIn message a few months ago thanking me for not blaming him publicly. I told him to learn everything he could, and to never let someone like Brad make technical decisions without pushback. The company survived. Barely. They lost a few major clients who couldn't tolerate the breach. They faced a PCI DSS audit that nearly revoked their certification. They paid fines to regulatory bodies in 3 states. But they survived, and they learned. They hired a full-time CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, a real one, someone with the authority and the budget to build security into every decision, not as an afterthought, but as a priority. They rebuilt the infrastructure according to my specifications. Proper segmentation, proper monitoring, proper backups, proper everything. It took 6 months and cost over $1 million, but when it was done, they had a network that was more secure than anything I had ever built for them. And me. I finished my consulting engagement and moved on. I took a position at a company that valued security from the top down, a company where the CEO understood that prevention is cheaper than cure. A company where I was part of the leadership team, not buried in a basement hoping that someone upstairs would listen. I still think about Meridian sometimes. I still think about those 11 years. I still think about Brad and Tyler and Sandra and all of it. And I think about the lesson buried in the wreckage. Some people only understand the value of something when it's gone. Some people only learn by losing. Some people will look at a network with perfect uptime and 0 breaches and conclude that security is unnecessary. And those people will always, eventually, learn the truth. Infrastructure is invisible until it fails. The people who maintain it are invisible until they leave, and the cost of ignoring expertise is never visible until the bill comes due. My name is Dave. For 11 years, I was the cheapest insurance policy that company ever had. They just didn't know it until they canceled the policy and the fire came. End of story.